Hey, everybody. Welcome to an unexpected podcast. And as you'll see below, we have the return of a familiar face who's been absent for a while. Rainier, welcome back. Why don't you tell us where in the world you've been and what exciting stuff you've been doing for, an unexpected podcast corporation and where you are now in the newest branch office?
Yeah, so I've been spreading the sweet love of unexpected podcasts across the world, door by door. No, for those who don't know, I am an international school teacher. I used to work in South Korea, but I moved countries. I currently now work in Honduras. And I made that decision to move because my wife's family's from here and we want to be closer to them. But yeah, that's all I've been up to, switching jobs, switching countries, visiting family in the US and the Netherlands. And it's just been really crazy busy. Plus, surprise, there's going to be another gamer joining the clan in December. So I got a baby on the way. So
Congratulations.
things have been wild, crazy, but
So what's the Honduran SPG scene look like?
so just like South Korea, it's a booming community. No, there's the good thing is my current school that I work for has a lot of British teachers, and many of them are familiar with strategy battle gaming. So there's potential there in the sense that I invited maybe a few over and they all saw my minis and were like, is that SPG? And I was like, you know it.
There you go.
So here we go. We're going to probably start a little group here in Honduras. And there are two. I remember there are a lot of Latin American viewers in our channel and stuff that have. So like if anyone's ever in Honduras, like shoot me up and we'll get a game in.
Is Honduras part of the Games Workshop empire? Is there a Games Workshop store down there or no?
It is not. So it's still technically a developing country. Yeah, I have not seen any of them. I've seen them in Mexico and Brazil, but not in Honduras, sadly.
It's still unconquered territory for Games Workshop.
It's like far Harad over here. It's still part of Middle Earth, but
All right. So the topic of the episode this time around is what we're calling "Make Good Good Again." So we've talked a lot about meta, and we've talked a bit about the difference between US meta, which is very evil heavy, and then we talked a bit about UK meta, or at least Articon meta, which is not nearly as good heavy. So we wanted to think at least a bit about what counters might be out there to kind of the evolving meta in at least the US. So the evil legendary legions, the shooty evil armies, and things like Assault on Lothlorien, things like Assault on Helm's Deep, and some of those lists, and kind of see what those lists would look like, and talk through what some various components would be. But before we do that, we are going to do a list review from SWE. And let me see if I can get this up on the screen, everybody.
I'm sure that's their real name.
Yep, I think so. All right. Okay, so we have a list from SWE. He's a UK player. He's getting set to go to his first tournament in a few weeks. It's a 600-point list. He's taking Harad Mordor. And saying Harad at 600 is a bad points level if you want Suladan and the Betrayer. I'm not convinced that's true, but we'll set that aside for right now. And he's hoping we could give a critique of his list. So Warband 1, he has Suladan on Armored Horse. He has 9 Harad Warriors with Bow and Spear. It's 3 Abrakan Guard or Watchers of Karna with Twin Blades. Hasn't made up his mind yet. I guess we can discuss that. He's got 6 Serpent Riders. So that's a is that legal? I'm not 100% certain that's legal. Isn't Suladan a hero of valor?
No, he's legend.
He's legend? Okay, yeah. And that's right, Betrayer's the hero of valor. We got a Mouth of Sauron on Armored Horse, 10 Black Numenorians, 2 Morannons with Shield and Axe, 3 Morannons with Shield and Spear. And then rounding it out, we have Shelob, which comes in at 36 models, 5 might, with 9 bows and 8 mounted. And he said alternatively, he was thinking of swapping Shelob out and or Shelob and the mouth out for Witch King on Armored Horse, Crown, 317-3 for the better spells and Harbinger, as well as the extra point of might. What are your thoughts? Well, I'll share some quick thoughts, and then I'll put it over to the community. I mean, my first thought when I saw this was that it's badly in need of a ring wraith. There's a lot of terror in this list. There's a big terror shield wall of 9 Black Numenorians. I'm sorry, 10 Black Numenorians, and then we've got a Shelob. I think all of them really want Harbinger of Evil around there if you can get it. And that I think you really want a witch, or not necessarily a Witch King, possibly a Witch King. We can kind of talk about how you get it, but I think you really want a ring wraith there. And then the question kind of becomes, what do you put in to be your killer with it? I think that's the big thought that I'll throw out there for right now. But why don't other people give your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's hard because you kind of see where the player's going with it. I would have not. I like the build right now, to be honest, because it's spread out. So with Shelob and the Mouth of Sauron, you're basically getting what feels like a ring wraith on Fell Beast, but they're split. Shelob being like that nice knockdown, go like assassin or mess up troop formations. And I do like that the Mouth of Sauron has transfix at 600 points, because you're going to see a lot of one will, speaking of good armies, like one will heroes at like 70 or 80 points. Transfix with that, plus he's 5/5. So it's kind of hard because I don't know, a wraith sounds perfect, but you would have to, because their ally have to choose. He would have to choose either a named wraith or the Witch King, and I think that's just going to be too many points. So I don't know. I like it as it is right now, because you have that punch from the Zerga Riders, the punch from Soladan with the banner. You have a few bows that Aberkin guard, which you could keep or switch, but that's another little bit of punch. Black Numenorians with the defense, they still cause terror. And some Morannons with that strength 4, all with like 2 Cav fight 5 like heroes and Shelob. I like it. I really like it, to be honest. I don't think I would change it, even though it would benefit the army.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a solid list, and I think if you're dead set on going with the style of list that oh, that's a nice blue screen.
Oops,
If you're
sorry.
dead set on
Guess that won't
going
work.
with that sort of style of list that you're planning on taking, then sure. Just sort of with my play style. Rainier sort of talked about how the Mouth of Sauron and Shelob together sort of make up a broken down Fell Beast almost. But with how I like to play, I would almost take the Mouth of Sauron, take Shelob, and fuse them together and make an actual Fell Beast. Which I would say I'd probably make the Witch King on Fell Beast with Crown. Which sure doesn't have the same, I guess, separated force that the Mouth of Sauron and Shelob have, but allows you to concentrate your damage in a more precise area, and also has the might points to be able to deal that damage, and of course drastically increase spell casting ability, because while the Mouth of Sauron does have 4 will and he is pretty good at casting, using him on his own without a ring wraith to back him up means that he will usually just drain the will of one hero and then nothing else will happen. So if I were to tailor this list more to my style, I would drop Mouth of Sauron, Shelob, and it looks like at the bottom he's asking if he should swap out for a Witch King with Armored Horse, Crown, and 317-3. That feels a little bit passive to me, so I think I would go I would go with the Fell Beast, with that immediate threat that your opponent has to worry about. And then you might have to do some points adjustments. There's a couple ways to do that. You could maybe drop some Serpent Riders down to some regular warriors, drop a couple of guys. But I think having Shelob as your only monstrous threat, and basically only working along with Suladan, because the Mouth of Sauron, while being fight 5, is more of a pseudo threat than an actual threat, because he doesn't have strike, and he's only got 2 attacks. So yeah, I think if I was going full competitive, and if you have the Fell Beast model, I would certainly take the Fell Beast instead. But I think this list could work just fine. And seems like it's your first tournament, so my advice, just take it and have fun.
Yeah, it's interesting what Evan says, and I do agree with him fully. I would not do Witch King on a horse with Crown and Zoldan, because I've actually seen that a lot at tournaments at 600, and it's good, but it's not like spicy. And I feel like the monster makes it spicy. So yeah, I don't know whether or not your first tournament having the Witch King on Crown and dropping your numbers, or having like a whole bunch of different little threats would do. My personal play style, I would keep it with the little threats, but I feel like what Evan says is super valid. And it depends on what you're comfortable with. If you want to just focus on like your army and 2 heroes, and that's easier to play with, or if you want to focus on the 3 heroes and kind of playing them like softly, it's completely what you're comfortable with.
I guess the only thing I would add is I want to say I have done a 600 point Suladan betrayer list, and I wish I'd spent a little more time with this beforehand, so I could have called that back up at 600 points. And you have to get rid of some stuff. I don't think you can use the Black Dubadorians. I think what it is it's a bunch. Basically, it's Suladan, it's the Betrayer on a horse, it's a captain. Might even have been a king on a horse, like about 3 serpent riders, and the rest was hard warriors with bow, being backed up by serpent guard. And you end up with a decent number of figures. I'll see if I can
Yeah,
see if
I
I can
think
post that on the
You
feed.
keep stalling, Dad.
Yeah, okay.
Right now I'm making a list, so you're king.
Yep.
And I think this actually works out fairly well.
didn't you want to event with that, Matt? Like, because I played you against it, and it was pretty nasty, because
Yeah, it was.
You
So
get the
right now, sorry to butt in, but I've got Suladan on horse, Betrayer on horse, King on horse with War Spear, 3 Serpent Riders, something like 16 Haradrim Bowmen, 16 Serpent Guard. Well, actually, I can bump the Bowman up a little bit more to max the bow limit, but it's roughly 38 models. Yeah, and you can do with that what you will, but I think that's a pretty strong list.
Yeah, so I've used that. I think I may have taken that to a tournament at in I wonder if that's the what either I took that or a similar list to to one of the tournaments in Philly.
Yeah, I think it was the King of Prussia one, Historicon.
Yeah. And I remember doing well with it. I can't remember how I ended up turning out with that, but
I remember that tournament. I think you won that tournament.
okay,
I
well
think
then there you go.
I think I played Devon round 3 in Contest of Champions with Rangers of Ithilien against Gullivar and the Witch King, and got absolutely smashed. And then next round, you narrowly beat him in like Hold Ground or something like that. So clearly it's a good list, because
Yeah.
it can win tournaments.
So
That
anyway, I mean, that's a kind of a radical restructuring, but you did say at the beginning that you would like to do a pure Harad list at 600. I think you can do it with Suladan and the Betrayer. You just have to go, you have to go, you have to basically just max out your bows, max out your Serpent Guard, throw in a few Serpent Riders, and you basically have a list that's all about poison shooting and poison weapons, and that's your list. You can't kind of throw in a lot of bells and whistles with it. I guess, yeah, like I said, I mean, as you guys said, this list will probably work fine. There's some things about it that I think keep it from being kind of as dangerous as it could be. The fact that the mouth doesn't have strike, so you've only got Suladan to strike. The fact that you've got a whole bunch of black Numenorians, but no, and a terrifying monster, but no -1 to prevent people to charge you, which kind of takes a lot of the sting out of that terror wall. I wish there was some other way around that. And I wonder if some sort of cheaper version of the Witch King. I don't think you want an armored horse. Maybe just put the Witch King on a regular horse. And if you could figure out a way to maybe give him a crown and make him something like 3 maybe 3-12-2 or something like that, and don't make him the leader, make Suladan the leader, because they're both heroes of legend. Might be a way to do it. And I'm wondering if maybe you could fit him in and still have Shelob, if you maybe,
So the cheapest Witch King that you can reasonably get, I
yeah,
think, would be Crown, Horse, 3 Might, no extra will, 1 extra fate, which is 125 points.
okay,
So even then, it's
40
not,
points.
yeah, it's a big jump.
Well, I mean, you could drop 3 Serpent Riders to get that.
Yeah,
3 Serpent Riders and take a shield off of one of your Morannons. And you could probably, so that's 3 figures down. I think you're still probably okay at 600 points. And then if you wanted to bulk up his will a little bit, maybe you drop like 1 more figure and throw another couple will in there. But because you could actually, you could probably deal with, you could actually probably do kind of a cheaper mix of your Harad guys if you wanted to put the bowman in front, or at least some bowman in front, and then get some Serpent Guard and put them behind. Maybe ways to cheapen it up. Anyway, it's a thought. What you would end up with is a how many might does the Mouth of Sauron have? Has he only
2.
got 2? Yeah, so you'd end up with an extra might. You'd end up with Harbinger of Evil. You'd end up with a 3 attack hero who could cast some different spells, and you'd end up with more will to cast them with. So it would add a whole bunch to this army that I think probably this army needs. And I think it probably would be worth sacrificing some figures to get. Just my thought.
I would counter, but I don't know. I'm always countering it just with my play style. But I would counter because 600, a lot of the scenarios are very you move all over the board, you want to go get the objectives. So I would counter to say that even if, I don't know, Shelob and the Mouth Mounted kind of bring range to the list, to where if they were separated, you can kind of get more out of it.
You still have Shelob and the Witch King mounted.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't think you're losing. I mean, you're losing 3 Serpent Riders is what you're losing, and possibly a Morannon.
Okay, I see. So you're talking convert the Mouth of Sauron to the Witch King mounted.
Right. For kind of a cheap Witch King mounted with either 10 or 12 will and 1 fate.
Make magic a lot better. And then would you make Soladan or the Witch King your leader?
I would make Suladan the leader.
Okay. Okay.
Because
I
then
would.
you got the Witch King to kind of throw into combat and kill stuff.
Mhm.
And Suladan can kind of hang back and keep his banner safe.
That's true. Not all your eggs in one of that. Well,
Yeah.
I don't, because Soladan can get wounded pretty easily.
I
Yeah,
think it depends
but he's
on,
got more
it
fate.
depends on how many fate you
Yeah.
Suladan is 1 fate.
Oh, does he have, oh, that's right. He's only got 1 fate,
But
doesn't he?
I think it depends on how many fate points you give the Witch King.
Yeah.
Because I think the Witch King can be a much safer leader. And it also has the benefit of in scenarios such as to the death and heirlooms, splitting your victory points. So if you kill Suladan, you don't get both the banner points and the leader points. But obviously, if you give the Witch King 1 fate, then you put a massive target on his head.
Yeah,
So
that's the problem. And I don't think you really have points to give him 2 fate. I mean, maybe you can. It depends how many figures you take off and how much will you're willing to put aside. The other thing you can do if you have Suladan as the leader is you can throw in the Witch King and you don't care if he runs out of fate and disappears. So you can just throw him in with Wild Abandon and maybe cast that extra spell or get him into that last combat at the end of the game. Try and blow him up. Whereas if he's your leader, once he gets down to like 2 will left, you got to really pull him out, and he's not going into the fight with a lot of will to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I would prefer him like not going into combat too much so he could cast and like having the freedom to where like you can kind of throw Soladan in to combat because he is pretty combat-y actually, but like not kill him for the banner points, but be willing to get him 1 or 2 wounds in the game and
Yeah.
not.
He can be pretty squishy though if you get him into the wrong place. But I guess the Witch King can also just implode. So I guess it's anyway. You at least have a choice between them. Anyway, I think that's an option. I think kind of a low cost Witch King on horse is an option.
Mhm.
So instead of the Mouth of Sauron. But and like I said, I think if you can sacrifice the points to get that done, you're going to have a lower model count, but your terror wall is going to be a lot more terrifying, and you're going to have a second strike in the list.
Sounds good. Sounds good. But let us know like how you do at the event. I'm super curious.
Yep, there you go. Okay, so let's move on to our main topic. So our main topic, as I mentioned at the beginning, is make good good again. This is in no way a political statement. This is merely a play on words. The idea was to come up with some sort of good lists that are good counters to the way at least the American meta is shaping up. So as we discussed in previous episodes, if you missed them, the American meta is very much evil centric. It's very much evil shooting centric. And we're starting to see a lot of assault on Lothlorien. We're starting to see a lot of assault on Helm's Deep. Corsairs are still pretty prevalent. The Nova winning army was a whole bunch of half trolls, and along with some kings and some Harad guys for shooty ability. Lots of evil out there. So I think we're going to do this in 2 phases. I think in the first phase, we're each going to throw out for consideration by the group an aspect of a good list, and then we can all kind of discuss how important we think this is, and whether this is something that would be, well, it's nice to have, but there's other things that are more important. As something this is good and important to have, and if you can fit it in your list, that's great. Or maybe this is essential and you need this is, if you're going to compete these days, you need this in your list. So I'm going to throw out the first one just off the top of my head and just say Blinding Light. So How important is it to have blinding light? How much should we be structuring our list to have blinding light in it these days?
I think it sounds really simple, but it's not, because the discussion around it, blinding white light typically only takes 6 inches, a 6-inch bubble. And it's hard when you have so much evil shooting that it's like you can't keep all of your things within the 6 inches. But I would agree with Matt. Like, my whole conversation on this episode is going to be around me playing evil and what I do not like playing against, what challenges me as an evil player. So with that in mind, I think blinding light is very important to bring as well, because it kind of like puts a lot of, I don't want to say all evil shooting players just play in a pocket and shoot. There's a lot to it. The Assault on Helm's Deep list also has Fight 4, Strength 4 spread throughout. The Half Troll list has a ton of power. Even Corsairs have like layers of shooting along with traps and all that. But yeah, I would say blinding light helps because it puts the initiative back onto the evil player to where they have to kind of counter it or they have to make moves. And that's typically when they do make mistakes. So I'd agree with you, man.
So where would you put it? Nice to have, good to have, or essential to have?
I would put it very nice to have.
Very nice
So
to have.
not quite essential. I think there are other ways to counter these evil, I guess, meta armies that are popping up. I think it's very good to have because it kind of challenges them. But even as an evil player, and I've played Mahood and Corsairs and things like that pop up in the list. And I've played against blinding light with those lists quite a lot. And there are holes to them. One being that one reason I don't like good armies too much is something like blinding light, unless you bring Kurdan, you have to sink a whole bunch of points to this one thing. So it's kind of, that's why I don't think it's essential, because sometimes you can, as an opponent, work around it or mitigate it, especially with scenarios and stuff. But I think it's very good to have.
Okay. And what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm just going to, so I think evil shooting is very prevalent, as we have discussed, which means that good armies have to have some method of dealing with shooting. And I think there's three main methods, well, I guess technically four, but three main methods that people will use to counteract this shooting. There is the I will just take more bows and outshoot them approach, which is used by shooting spam lists like Theodred's Guard, Helm's Guard. What other lists do this? Some fiefdoms lists do that a lot, where they just take a bunch of Blackroot Vale archers. If people try to spam elves, they'll do that same thing. There's of course the blinding light approach, which is obviously what we are mainly discussing here, which is I think the most the easiest to, I'd say the most effective and the easiest to slap on any list, because all you need to do is figure out some sort of alliance or something like that, or just take a model with this certain spell, and then there's your shooting resistance. And then the third one is some alternative method of shooting resistance, that either being extremely high mobility or extremely high defense, which you'll see in a lot of other cases.
Or extremely high numbers, I think, is the other way to do it.
Yes, or extremely high numbers. Those three things. So stuff like horde armies like Goblin Town, extremely fast moving armies.
Not very
like,
prevalent on the good side.
that
Yeah,
is true.
that's
You
the
know,
hard.
Rivendell Knights, though they generally just get shot out anyways because they're on horses. And then stuff like dwarves as well can usually weather most shooting, other than ballistas, which they hate. And then of course there's the fourth option, which is to, of course, take none of those things and then instantly lose to Assault upon Helm's Deep as you begin the game, which is not something I recommend, but people will take those sorts of lists. So to get back to blinding light in my extremely roundabout way of getting there, I'd say, uh, I think it's, I'd say it's, I'd say it's very nice to good to have. Because if you have an army list that is able to create semi-sufficient counterplay to those sorts of shooting style lists, then it's not something that you need to bend over backwards to get. But I definitely think that if you're planning on taking on the evil lists that you're seeing nowadays, it's something you should really consider in your list if you want to do well competitively.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's right. I mean, I'd put it in the good to have category. And I think the reason it's in the good to have category as opposed to like the essential to have category is you need to, if you're going to take the blinding light route to solving the shooting problem, you need to build your entire army around that. Because there's only 5 ways to get it, right? There's the 2 flavors of Galadriel, Lady of Light, and the normal one. There's the 2 flavors of Gandalf, and then there's Círdan. And as you said, Evan, you have to figure out a way to ally that in. And frequently, and none of those models are cheap. And then when you figure out how to ally, except perhaps Círdan, but then once you have to figure out how to ally somebody in, then they're not cheap, even Círdan. And that prevents you from using some of the other techniques we discussed for avoiding shooting. Like, it typically prevents you from having a really large number of models because you're sinking all of this money into blinding light. So, that's why, well, I think countering shooting is essential to do for a good army. I think that blinding light as a way to do it, it is a way to do it, but it's a way that comes with costs that hinder you in other aspects.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's back in the day, people would just slot it in. But I think like now you have to really weigh those costs. And I think it's hard too, because Evan mentioned it. You can counter the shooting with bad, just like bring more troops, but it's very difficult, I find, with good. But yeah, for me, a way to counter it is just to go back to the basics, defense 7 and a dwarf ballista. so for me, coming up to a tournament with Corsairs or Harad or anything like that, the one thing that's just really hard to break through are dwarves. Dwarves that come to the 40 model count at a tournament, especially if they have the ballista.
Well, let's do this, Rainier. All right, you're up next. Nominate your aspect of a good list that we want to add in.
I would say the dwarf ballista from Iron Hills.
The Iron Hills dwarf ballista. All right, fair enough.
I still think it has a lot. And when we're specifically talking about the recent meta in the US, Assault on Lothlorien, Assault on Helm's Deep, that list is pretty good. You have defense 8 guys that you can kind of like not too much bulk out, but like I made an 800 list. You can get 42 of them with a ballista Dane and 2 named heroes. And you can also add some crossbows to make it dangerous in that 12-inch range when you come and you can't shoot. You can still shoot your ballista. It's on a 6. But when Assault on Lothlorien comes, that 12-inch range, you can get a good volley up against them. So I would say the dwarf ballista, even pair it with some Lake Town or some elves. For me, even with the cost, it got more expensive like a few years ago. Still going against it, I'm like, ooh, like I'm gonna have to be really creative when I go against this.
All right, so Rainier's nomination is the Iron Hills ballista. Evan, what's your thought on that? How do you rate that?
Well, I'm sort of struggling to come up and rate this here, because I think it's compared to blinding light, which is just like a blanket thing that you need in your list. The dwarf ballista is a very I guess a very specific circumstance in that you're only taking it really in Iron Hills, and then maybe if you're doing something funky or creative, you're taking it in Survivors of Lake Town or Thranduil's Halls or something like that. And it's definitely, seeing as we had, I'm fairly sure 0 dwarf ballistas in the entirety of Nova.
Yep.
I don't think I saw a single one. It's definitely underexplored. And yeah, I'm not sure whether it's good anymore. Because after its points cost was nerfed, then people just stopped using it. So it's sort of hard to tell whether or not it is actually viable or not. I do remember a specific game that I played against you, Rainier. I think it was a practice game, but I think it showed off the power of the ballista quite nicely, where it basically just shut down almost all of your Corsairs shooting in that entire game, um, which was able to help out my elves and lake towners a lot. So I think it definitely still has the potential. I think another problem it has is it's
Keep
just
talking for a minute.
useless.
I need to go get a rule book. I'll be right back.
Okay. So in the effort to continue to stall, um, I think it suffers from assault upon Lothlorien as well. Because Rainier, I don't know how much you've read into that legendary legion, but one of its special rules that makes it so dangerous, and this is for obviously for listeners as well, is that 12-inch that 12-inch Dark of Night special rule, which means that your ballista will only be hitting on 6s throughout the entirety of the game. And because it's got a minimum range of 12 inches, it will never be able to hit on anything that's not 6s, which will make it, I'd say, especially weak against that sort of list.
Let me pause you there for a second, because I had that same initial thought. And then as we continued discussing it, what I began to wonder is whether or not that 12-inch, basically the 12-inch you can't shoot unless you need a 6 is measured from the ballista or the guy that's spotting for the ballista. Because remember, the ballista is one of those volley fire ones where somebody can be, it doesn't need to be the ballista itself that has line of sight.
Okay,
Good question.
that's interesting. That's actually a
List of shoes.
So that's why I was going to get the rule book, because I wanted to look
Yeah.
up the cover of Darkness rule to see.
Yeah, because I was thinking I'll roll the dice and it wouldn't do good against the assault on Lothlorien, but I think it would really shut down the assault on Helm's Deep or the Corsairs or the Harad or stuff like that.
Yeah, Assault upon Helm's Deep would be quite an interesting matchup, because on one hand, obviously they've got their own ballistas, which if they're able to break through your own ballista line, which I think they do on, is it a 4-up for
Yeah, I think
siege
it's
engines to get through the thing?
now we need another book. Do you have the Armies of the Hobbit book next to you, Evan?
Maybe. Defense of the North, War in Rohan, Armies of the Hobbit. You are in luck.
All right. So I've got the Assault on Lothlorien list, so we can talk about that special rule. You've got. All right.
Welcome
so
to everybody's favorite podcast where we look up rules the entire
Yes.
time.
Rules Lawyering 101. Okay, so for the first aspect of this discussion, the Cover of Darkness rule says that due to reduced visibility, models cannot be targeted by shooting magical powers or special abilities over 12 inches away. Then it says siege engines may still target enemy models more than 12 inches away. However, in this situation, they will only ever hit on a roll of a 6. So what does it mean to target? And why don't you take a look at, so the next question is, take a look at the Iron Hills Ballista rules. And does anybody happen to have a copy of the actual rules that would have the line of sight rules in them that we could look up?
No.
Go dig that up.
Yes, I mean, yeah, it would have to be the
Yeah,
real
it'd have
rule
to be the
book,
real
which
rules.
I do not have currently
All right.
next to me.
So, all right. So, Ev, why don't you check and see what it says in the Iron Hills ballista? Does it just have volley fire? Is that what it has?
It follows the rules for volley fire.
Follows the rules for volley fire. So I will need to look those up, and then you can talk about using it to burst or to block assault ballista shots.
Interesting.
All right. So looking at the rules for blocking shots. So it's actually weaker at blocking siege engine shot. It's not there, Dad. It's actually weaker than at blocking shots than the than I would have expected, because it only succeeds on a 5-up. So if the ballista shot passes through that area, you roll a die, and on a 5-up, that shooting attack is prevented. Otherwise, it will get through as normal. So I'm not sure about the matchup against the assault ballistas. I don't think that it would necessarily be incredible.
Yeah. Okay. So we have volley fire, and for volley fire, what it says is models that use volley fire do not make in the way rolls. Oh, hang on a second. This enables it to shoot at a target and its crew, at a target it and its crew cannot see, so long as any friendly model can see the target and is in range of your siege engine. All right, so this is not entirely clear, but I think the deploying common sense, which the recent FAQ has said is something we can actually deploy.
Oh no.
Yeah, so if this, I think this actually, all right, this is something I'm going to post, and we'll see what answers we get on this. But I think the answer may be that this thing can actually, that the Iron Hills ballista and other volley firing siege engines can shoot as long as somebody and hit on greater than or lower than a 6, as long as somebody is within 12 inches to call in the fire, because we all know back in Middle Earth, tactical radios were common, and it was very easy to adjust artillery fire onto a target that the artillerists could not see. So, I mean, I think that's how it would work. But anyway, all this said, I think this is still kind of a nice to have, because, all right, so this is, if this thing can only hit on 6s outside of its minimum range, then I think this is kind of a nice to have. But if you hit assault on Lothlorien, it's going to be, irrelevant. This may kind of verge higher up towards the good to have if this is an effective counter to assault on Lothlorien, because you can run random dwarf up within 12 inches of a target and start bombarding it with the ballista. But you still have to hit to get the benefits, and the benefits tend to go away once the other side's line gets really close to you, because then they start charging you, and it's hard not to, I can't remember how that, it's been too long since I've used a siege engine, so I can't remember how I think you can still drop it on somebody if it can be put on somebody else, but then you end up in a situation where you can have it fall so that the blast radius of the twirly whirly kills a whole bunch of your dwarves, and that's never a good outcome.
Yeah.
But all right, any last thoughts on that, Rainier, before we move on to Evan's nomination?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, Evan, nominate an aspect of a good list.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go with something much less specific. And I guess I'll just say right off the bat that I think this is one of the only things that I deem to be essential in a good army, in this meta, and that is numbers. And specifically what I mean by numbers is back in the old edition, and in other places, like Europe, more recently, there was a trend towards big, big good heroes and small army lists averaging maybe about 30 models at 800 points, or maybe a bit more than that. And I think nowadays, one, with the style of scenarios we have, being just so model count focused, and two, with the style of list that people are bringing that are able to absolutely shut down big heroes and then have the opposing army rely entirely on their troops, means that at minimum hitting that 40 model count, and maximum going even more than that, like a horde, like 50, 60 models, seems almost essential, to be able to deal with the magic and the high maneuvering capabilities that a lot of evil lists have, in the scenario spread that we have now. So I honestly think that it's just an essential component of any competitive list. And only in very, very rare circumstances would you see a elite army, in the sense that you have a significantly to moderately low model count.
Yeah. So as I was thinking about this beforehand, I was wondering whether this was going to be on the essential side too. Um, and I'm not 100% convinced it's essential, but I think I would probably rate it as almost essential. And I think if you don't have a high model count, some model count that's at least approaching a goblin town or a massive goblins, you need something else now to kind of make up for that. And that something else is probably going to be either, it's probably Aura of Dismay or something like that, that can, prevent the hordes from kind of like swamping you. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to put that. I'm going to give that an almost essential. And if it's not essential, you need a different plan. And that plan can be either mass shooting, so you're just going to kind of whittle down the numbers as they close in, or a combination of at least significant numbers and something else along the line that's going to cause you to do an awful lot of damage, or something that's just going to kind of keep those numbers at bay, like terror, that's going to make up the difference there.
Yeah, I think I'd rate it around the same, almost essential. I think just pure numbers. Let's give an example of like Lake Town Guards isn't that dangerous. I think volume is a good word for it. What you want to have a lot of volume in a certain area. I think that's what makes it. Let's take Corsairs, for example, really dangerous. The volume they have in shooting. It's like a lot of concentrated like strength force shooting, the volume they have in throwing weapons, the volume they have in fight for. Um, Something like that. Like what Evan was saying, 40 or higher. I agree with that too. Even the dwarf list that I made with the ballista, it wasn't just a dwarf list. It was like 42 models, because I think you don't have to, but in my opinion, it's smart to hit above 40 to kind of counter the shooting or the mass hordeness of like what evil can bring when it comes to volume, because they can bring a lot of volume. So yeah, I'd say essential or almost essential.
Yeah, the only part of that I disagree with is the Lake Town Guard not being scary. When you see 60 Lake Town guards on the other side of the table at like 600 points, that can be pretty scary.
That's true.
Evan, any more thoughts?
I mean, I think it's probably about as close to essential as you can get in any list, because I don't think in order to win, there is a specific structure that you need to adhere to. Which I think is one of the best parts about this game, is you don't have to conform to a very specific meta in order to win. You still have some flexibility, but I think numbers is definitely what gets closest to essential in my eyes, just with the way that the meta is shaping out and the way that the scenarios work out. And before we move on to our next topic, I wanted to, of course, do my standard thing of cheating and throwing another topic in.
Oh,
because
I have another
wanted to
topic
hear-
too. I figured we'd do another round.
Oh, okay. Well, I will start the next round, because why not? And my choice, I think, would be magic resistance. And I'll go a bit more in depth into that. So the lists we're seeing nowadays, we don't see a lot of Black Riders, but the Europeans see a ton of Black Riders. We also didn't see a lot of Mordor and Angmar in our meta, which was a bit surprising, but I definitely intend to continue taking those armies. And in my opinion, they're still incredibly top tier. It's just we didn't see people in the US take advantage of them as much as I would have expected. And then obviously, Assault upon Lothlorien has that extreme magic component as well, where
Although that magic
sure, most
component,
of it is
yeah,
buffing magic. I will
right.
give you that. But Musger's entire shtick is shutting down heroes, and other shamans have transfix as well that they can shut down. So yeah, that's basically my thinking is magic resistance. And um I would say it's bordering nice to have, good to have, but I personally would put it in good to have. Just because of how crushing it can be to take a big hero like Aragorn and then go up against a guy with, you know, 270-point wraiths, and then Aragorn does nothing the entire game and gets completely shut down. Or even worse, which is what I like to do, which is to take a caster plus a big monster and then kill Aragorn turn 2, and then your opponent's basically lost immediately. So, and just to finish this out with what magic resistance is, either I resistant to magic or fortify spirit is like the obvious thing, but also just not taking huge heroes is a form of magic resistance as well, because you're less punished for those heroes getting shut down. For example, if they compel and kill your Hurin, you're much better off than if they compel and kill Aragorn. So having something like that, I think, is probably, I'd say, a good to have.
Yeah, I want to agree with that. The only reason I'm hesitating is, although the way you kind of rephrased it kind of expanded the definition of magic resistant in a way I wasn't really thinking of it. But magic resistance, like blinding light, or at least traditional magic resistance like blinding light, is one of those things that if you're going to get it, puts severe limitations on your army composition. I mean, magic resistance in the traditional sense, which is like all your figures resist magic, you're talking you have to be either hobbits, or you have to be pure Lothlorien, or like pure Ents, or I think pure Eagles also gets it if I'm
Numenor.
remembering correctly. Or Numenor, which doesn't quite get the entire army, but at least gets everybody near your heroes. So there's limitations on who can get it. I agree with you. It is really essential. I think kind of the next class down from kind of that army-wide magic resistance is being able to at least get your big heroes magic resistance. So that means taking a Glorfindel, or taking an Elendil, or taking somebody who can cast Fortify Spirit, which means either Gandalf the White, or figuring out a way to get Galadriel of Light, Lady of Light, back in your list somehow. And that way, at least you're if you're going to take a big hero, you at least know he's not just going to get kind of deleted by a couple of casters with transfix or paralyze or something like that. And I think having at least that level, if you're going to take big heroes, is essential. Well, or at least it's between good and essential. You need some sort of answer if you're going to take big heroes, because I think you're right. I think Aragorn in the current meta is not really that competitive anymore, because he's once again kind of been gotten too easy to check with the new magic that's out there.
His girlfriend is no longer around, so he's
Yeah.
much more difficult to
Yeah,
take.
it's much more difficult. The other aspect of what you said, which is not really magic resistance, but it's kind of building your lists with crippling magic in mind. And
I mean, I should probably rephrase what I mean by magic resistance, which is some way to deal with or blunt the effects of magic, as to make it so if you draw against a magic caster, you are not significantly disadvantaged simply by their presence.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a fair and that's a fair strategy. And this is kind of like the leader strategy parallel to, I'm going to have a lot of bodies, and just so that I can just absorb the shooting on the way in. And that's that I'm not going to have a 200 and something point hero that's going to get transfixed off the board. I'm going to instead have 2 or 3 80 to 100 point heroes where you have to work on taking them down sequentially, and while you're taking down one of them, the other two hopefully will be able to hack their way into your casters and prevent you from doing it. I think that's another strategy. Fair enough.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think like one of those resistance to magic type things also includes someone like Elendil or Glorfindel. Just something, just negate.
The heavy hitting hero that comes with Fortify Spirit built in, so that he's a hard target when it comes to magic. Agreed.
Yeah. And that would, for me, I was going to choose the same thing, actually. Something that's like that, magic resistant, in the sense that it doesn't really bother them, like it's not going to be a handicap for them. They can just make it through. And I would even say, like, for the shooting too, something like that, to where, again, same conversation, you have like a lot of bodies or magic resistance of some way, to just don't do it. Like a lot of the things back in the day, used to see people list build against each other, list build, oh, this can beat this. No, now this can beat that. Now this can beat that. I think a lot of good players now are just saying, I'm not even going to play with that. Like, let's just like make what you have not cause too much damage in the round, in the game. It's going to cause damage, but let's just negate it. Maybe I won't have any mega heroes, so you're not going to like shut down anything. You can't transfix my whole army. Maybe I'm going to have a horde, so you're shooting, you're not going to like break me before like our battle lines even meet, stuff like that. So I think that's where like we're all kind of shifting towards. It doesn't have to counter it, it just has to slowly make it passive.
Yeah. All right, so let me throw out my second theory here, and that's high fight value. And feel free to include in your discussion what you think I mean by a high fight value, because I understand there would be different meanings of this. So I'm not gonna put out a pro or con on this one way or the other. I'm going to throw this out to you guys and then give my thoughts afterwards. High fight value. Rainier, your thoughts?
High fight value against shooting, it's good because once battle lines hit, typically a horde shooting army does not have high fight value. Against something like Assault on Lothlorien, it's good because then like these big monsters or something that hits you aren't going to win against typical elves or something like that. But I think it's high fight value is good. I think what's more important is the volume of high fight value. I take that over like maybe a small army of 5/5. I'd prefer like a 50 army with 50 models at fight 4. So I don't know where you're interpreting it, Matt, but I would interpret it back to the volume. I want a volume of height 5 value.
Okay, Evan.
Well, I mean, there's two interpretations of this, I think. I think there's high fight value and then there's higher fight value. With higher fight value, of course, is always something that one would desire. The question is where to cut off that particular particular statement. But if we're interpreting simply off of high fight value, which I would say, in order, the most optimal high fight value would be fight 5 against evil, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of which is two of the most powerful armies, those being Uruk-hai and Corsairs are fight 4, half trolls are fight 5, giant spiders are fight 4, and then basically every evil hero is also fight 5, which is obviously a huge deal if you're able to get your fight 5 models into those heroes, because sometimes those heroes will just lose, and then you get a lot of progress off of that. So I'd say having access to high fight value models is very, very important. But I think there's also merit to having just good enough fight value. And an interpretation of this could be something like Survivors of Laketown, which generally fight 3 is not overly optimal, but against something like Assault upon Lothlorien, having fight 3 with the 12-inch banner is good enough, and you'll get a lot of progress off of that. But I'd say I would put having at least a sprinkling of fight 5 models in your army, if not more, in the good category, because there's so many shenanigans with evil that rely on fight 5 models, that having the ability to counter that is quite important.
Yeah, so and that's, I think, the critical distinction is, do I go with an army that's entirely fight 4, or do I go with an army that's largely fight 3 with or perhaps even lower if you're taking hobbits or something like that, with a smattering of like fight 5 elves or even fight 6 elves with spears to stand behind them in certain critical places? Because I think the problem these days with the kind of old style good army that was like entirely fight 4, entirely fight 5, is it just isn't big enough as far as number of figures go. It's too expensive. And entirely fight 5 is great if you're going to run into Uruk-hai and be entirely fight 4, but if you're going to run into something that's a horde of fight 2, it's you priced yourself out of the market. Whereas, if I get a bunch of fight 3 or some fight 2, and then I've got maybe like 6 or 8 guys with fight 5 spears that can kind of stand behind the critical places, that may be the way to go. And I think that's why you're seeing, at least in the Articon meta, a whole bunch of elves and friends armies, is because they're taking the elves to get the high fight value, and then they're just taking cheap bodies to kind of stand in front of the elves and protect the flanks of the elves. And I think that is, I think that's the only way you can square the volume versus high fight value circle, is to say, I got a bunch of bodies, and then I got a few elves, and I'll apply elves where elves are necessary to win the game. I think that's my thought on that. So Rainier, you got one last thought here as far as something for a good army?
Something for a good army. I don't think it's essential, but it's there. I would say monsters. And what I mean by monsters, I mean like a model that just cannot be stopped. An example of that would be Gwahir, Elendil. Who else? Probably Dane Ironfoot on Pig, and probably Thranduil on Elk. So they're really expensive. I don't think they're essential, but I think they're good takes because you can't quickly dehorse them and you can't really shut them down with magic unless you have a lot of magic. So for me, that's just something out there. When I play against them, I'm kind of like more alert because my soft stuff can't really take them, and I have to just mitigate how much damage they have. Because you really have to. Those are some of the models that you really have to take high stacked magic or high stacked like just something heavy to stop them. So that's why I put them there. I'd say they're there, not essential, but they're there.
Ev?
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why you take good in the first place. Because there are very few evil models that fit that role that aren't utterly absurdly expensive. Obviously the first evil monsters, not in the sense that they are actually monster models, but those sort of unstoppable forces that can do insane amounts of damage. Um, are, your Saurons and your Balrogs, and then they're half your army. Whereas Gwahirs and Elendils and such are much, much cheaper. So the only evil model I can find that fits that role really is Gullivar. And of course, there's a reason why Gullivar is so good. Um, and yeah, but if you take good, you have insane access to these sorts of models. Um, yeah, your Elendils, your Gwahirs and whatnot. So I think being able to have that sort of that forcing piece that can put your opponent on the back foot and can really lay down the hurt while your high quality troops grindy army goes in and plays the attrition war is extremely useful. So I'd put that in a good to have sort of category as well.
Yeah, I guess the only caution I'd say is if you're going to do that, at least at most point, at most tournament points levels, this is less true when you get up to 1,000. If you're going to do that, you probably can't have more than one of those guys and still have enough models to kind of remain in the game against evil swarm armies. And if you're going to have only one of them, that has to be a model that can't be shut down easily with magic, so that a quarter of your army list points wise isn't taken off the board by a 70-point budget ring wraith, and that leaves a small number of folks who can do that unless you have some sort of way to get fortified spirit in. I mean, Glorfindel, obviously, he's one of the reasons you see him so often is because he's one of the guys, he's probably the most cost-effective guy that fits this bill. Elendil's another one. He's a little pricier. Gwahir, so Gwahir does not come with a resistance to magic unless you're in some sort of pure list. But at least Gwahir is not quite as expensive, so that you can, and not only is not quite as expensive, but is very difficult to kill. So that if Gwahir gets transfixed, oh well, maybe next time. It's very hard to kind of transfix and then flash kill a Gwahir just because they're tough. So I think Gwahir is still on that list. So I guess that's my only caution. So I agree, all somewhere between a nice to have and a good to have. So all right, so those are some thoughts. Those are some ideas of components of good armies that you can put out there that I think can kind of exist in the current meta. So what we each did is we each came up with a list that probably incorporates some or all of these things that we just discussed that we think would be competitive in the current meta that people at least may not be thinking about now. Why don't I start with one? And I will say, given the number of times I've played against Assault on Lothlorien recently, I built this specifically with countering assault on Lothlorien in mind. So here's my list. Warband number 1, Arvidui, last king of Arnor. With him are 1 warrior of Arnor with a banner, 14 warriors of Arnor with the usual spear shield. Warband 2, Malbeth the Seer. With him is a 2nd warrior of Arnor with banner and 11 warriors of Arnor with spear and shield. Warband number 3, Captain of Arnor. 3 Hobbit archers, 9 warriors of Arnor. Warband number 4, Captain of Arnor, with 3 Hobbit archers and 9 warriors of Arnor. So you come up with 6 bows, but that's obviously not the selling point. The selling point is the 55 models, all of whom are fight 6, which is really kind of the magic defense that you want to have against assault on Lothlorien. Well, not all of them. The hobbits aren't, obviously, and the guys with the banners aren't, but most of them are fight 6.
Defense 6.
I'm sorry, defense 6.
I was like, hold. What was that?
Yeah, no, fight
The
6 warriors
warriors
of Arnor.
8. Yeah, so we've
No.
got 8-point models that are defense 6, fight 6.
Fight
yeah,
6, yeah,
very
they're
balanced.
unstoppable. No, they're fight.
Yeah.
They're fight 4, so they're going to be a higher fight value than the prowlers. And at least they'll be able to tie the spiders when not enraged. They're defense 6, which makes them fairly tough to wound. And there are enough bodies in this list so that you should be able to go in a shield wall 1-for-1 against the goblins. So that the goblins are not getting that magical +1 to wound when they win. And they're probably not going to win, and they're probably going to be kind of outkilled by these guys. And that's the reason I threw in the 2nd banner too, is so that you can get, a good 14 inches of banner coverage all across the line. And you've also got Malbeth, who can just kind of keep guys alive if they happen to lose the fight roll. And you should have enough bodies that you can just surround Arvidui to keep spiders and stuff away from him, and just use his magical, I don't care about courage to go after people. Downsides against this list are against kind of more conventional, like other good armies. This list isn't going to be nearly as good because it just doesn't have the high character hitting power to take on like an Elendil or even like a Bolg or an Azog or something like that. You have to just kind of drown. You have to adopt goblin tactics and just kind of drown that opposing army in bodies and hope that you can kill all the warriors before Azog can kind of hack his way through. And I think the other problem this list would have is, at least in certain terrain types, is against the Black Riders, where basically you would have to just kind of try to hide Arvidui, because otherwise he'll get black darted to death and you'll lose your ability to auto charge. As long as you can kind of hide Arvidui in this list, though, I think this list probably has a decent shot against the Black Riders, because it's just got enough bodies that will ignore courage tests, regardless of whether they're -3, to charge in and take the Riders down. So that's my thoughts. What are the other people's thoughts on this?
I like it. Yeah, I like it a lot as a counter to that army specifically, but I do agree with you to some points, like other things could do some damage against it. It's just such a interesting game, because you typically go to a 5 or 6 game tournament and you just have no idea what you're gonna go against. That's the beauty of it. But I like it. I like the horde aspect to it while retaining fight 4 and defense 6. I actually played against this in Nashville when I played Mahood. My opponent just didn't get lucky because it was a maelstrom battle, and I kind of like had my camels right on the army with my half trolls like right off the bat. But I think that said, this is a really good list, especially for the scenarios that are in play now. You're going to have this army spread all across the battlefield, and that fight 4 defense 6 just basically everywhere, and the shooting to the range. So
And as long as you can keep Arvidui along, you don't care about courage anymore, or Arvidui alive. Sorry.
So it's pretty good in that aspect, though it is slow to an extent.
At least you got
also,
two captains.
that's true. Are the captains fight 4 or 5?
They're fight 5.
Yeah, that's a really good take too.
Yeah. But you do have 4 points of march there if you want it.
Mhm. I like it.
So,
I mean, I don't have much to say about this army list other than, my God, is it boring? Um, I would sooner consume sandpaper than play this army at any tournament, but I definitely have a very different play style than what this army is designed to accommodate. I think it could definitely have some interesting matchups, especially against Assault upon Lothlorien. But I think this is a 650 army, right?
this is 700.
No, 700.
Yep.
Yeah. But I think part of why Arnor works so well is it works well at low points at I'd say 600 maximum, 500 to 600, where you can take Arvedui Malbeth captain and then get like 40 guys, and then that's your army. And that's extremely strong. But I think it starts to weaken once you get to 700 because it's just so one-dimensional, and your opponents are able to get more effective and more forcing pieces that you cannot properly handle. Like if you see a Gullivar across the board with this list, you might as well shake the hand immediately, because Gullivar will munch through the entirety of the army, and there's absolutely nothing you can do. Um, in the same sense, what Rainier was just talking about with those good monsters, like if you play against any of them, you're just going to watch as 4 of your models disappear every single turn, as that hero just chops them into itty bitty bits. And Malbeth can sort of help prevent that, but really not that much.
Yeah, it is one of those. I agree with you, Evan, because I always wanted to collect this actually, because the paint, I feel like you can paint them however you want. There's a lot of creativity there. But after playing them at an 800-point tournament with Mahood, I was like, I'm having a little too much fun playing against them. I don't think
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I think
all of your
700
things.
700 is probably about the top where you can kind of pull this off.
It's
Now,
still good.
with that said, above this level, I think what can keep this competitive is if you ally in a Glorfindel and some elves and a Círdan. And you lose the courage buff from Arvedui, but in the end you get the courage buff from Círdan and his aura of command, so that solves that problem. You start to get you can get a count, a hitty counter hero that is hard to shut down with magic. And you can get blinding light to protect you from shooting and a bunch of other things. I think that's really where you need to take this list if you get above 700.
Yeah,
700, it's 700. It's if you add in Glorfindel and Círdan, it's too light on numbers for it to be effective. I think once you get up to 800, you can pull it off.
Yeah, the fight 5 sprinkled all around it will stop those cheapish evil heroes from just heroic combating through it like butter.
Sure.
So I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I feel like this list right now strikes me as a list where if I ever go up against it, I'm just going to be ecstatic because all of my things will work. Every trick that I have, except for like courage shenanigans, will work against this list, and you will have to bend over backwards to attempt to counter it.
On the other hand, this list, if you take it against Assault on Lothlorien, most of their tricks won't work against this list because their tricks depend on outnumbering and shooting before you can close and kind of get to grips with them. This list is like, yeah, okay, I'll see you one goblin, I'll raise you a warrior of Arnor.
Mm.
And then you play against them and reconnoiter, and then they quarter themselves, run 2 bats off the board and win.
Well, yeah, although this does have a bunch of captains and a bunch of guys. So I think you got some answers to that too.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, shall I go next?
Yeah, go next.
Okay, mine's very simple. I'm just going back to the basics. Dwarves. So I have the Iron Hill Dwarves. My first warband is Dane Ironfoot on his war pig. 6 Iron Hill Dwarves with shield, 8 Iron Hill Dwarves with shield and spear, and 2 crossbow Iron Hill Dwarves. Second warband is Dory. He has 5 Iron Hill Warriors with shield and 5 with spear and shield. Third warband is Nori. He has 2 with shield, 4 with spear and shield, and 2 with crossbow. And the last warband is going to be the Dwarf Ballista. So I just wanted to keep it simple. One reason is because I didn't really have time to write it, but also I just think defense 7 or defense 8 over 40 models does really well against the likes of crossbows or ballistas or even sometimes magic and monsters. So that's why I put it. It's 42 models, 10 might. The 2 dwarves outside of Dane are both 3 attacks. And I believe they're both weapon masters, so they go burly. Dane Ironfoot's a beast. You also have the ballista. I really like the idea of the ballista, this one, or a Kazakh spam with defense 7, having the other ballista in the Kazakh army, just because it forces your opponent to kind of take the initiative. They can't just sit back and shoot or sit back and wait to outmaneuver you. The 1 or 2 models, maybe 3 models, or a monster threat that you can kill with 1 ballista shot really threatens a lot of people. And to be honest, it spooks them as well. So that's why I put that in the list. Once you hit the battle lines, it's kind of hard, even with what's strength 5 against D8. Do you kill it on a 6 or?
Yeah, you kill it on a 6.
Yeah. So even that, when it comes to Mahood or half trolls, you're still only rolling a 6 to wound them. It's just like a big Tin Man kind of going, but also the Tin Man has a giant like spear that's thrown at you each turn. So
How many figures?
42.
42. And how many points was this?
This was 800.
800. And remind me what are Dory's special abilities?
Let me see.
Dory has like 50 bajillion attacks, if I remember correct. No, Dory, sorry. Dory is the guy that has, so he's 75 points, 3 attacks, fight 5, weapon master.
Gotcha. Okay.
With a 2-handed mace.
And
no strike is his big thing. That makes him not an auto include in every list.
Right.
And then
2 might.
Nori is kind of the same, 500 points more, 2 might still, heroic strike he has, but he's also a weapon master, and he can re-roll dice with a duel and re-roll dice when making strikes. So he's got weapon synergy. So they're both kind of like, they're there. I think like they're kind of weaker versions of someone like Thorn or Dwalin, or even Glowin to an extent. But for 75, 80 points, it kind of allowed me to hoard out more of the dwarves. And I think they'd make a threat because with the crossbow, what is it called? The ballista, your opponent's going to have to come to you, and they're going to have Dane, both of them, and a whole ton of Iron Hills. Not the best, I think, but considering against the current meta when we're building against mass evil shooting and the likes, I think it can kind of like hold its ground.
I'm interested, Rainier, in how you managed to get 42 models out of this, because I just pulled this up in my software, and the absolute maximum models I can get, and this is without a banner, is 38 models.
I dropped spears.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I dropped a lot of spears.
Yeah, he has a bunch of Iron Hill dwarves that don't have spears.
Oh no, I have a 50-50 split of those.
Yeah.
I'm just, so Dane's on a boar, yes?
Mm-hmm. Let me
Do
do
you
my
have a
math.
banner?
I don't have a banner.
You do not, okay. Is your ballista 125 points?
Uh-oh, there you go. Ding, ding, ding.
I got caught by the FAQ.
Gotcha.
It did seem to be fairly buff numbers wise for Iron Hills.
Okay, if that's the case, I'd go maybe, what'd you say max I could get, Evan? Like 38?
Yeah, 38, I think is reasonably what you can get.
Not my, I'll go 38, or potentially switch Dane for Thorin.
I'm not sure about that one because you lose the auto pass courage tests.
You also lose a
Um,
march.
That's true.
Yeah.
How about this is
And Dane.
Yeah.
you just build a list for me, Evan. But I still like the defense 7 and defense 8 of dwarves, and I think it's very, I don't know, sometimes to counter, in my opinion, to counter these like mega things, you just got to go back to simplicity. And for me, that's just a lot of tin men or a horde. We can't choose evil armies. Typically, I go to simplicity with evil armies. Just bring a whole bunch of one thing. Go with volume instead of like spread out all over the place with heavy hitters. But yeah, I think just simplicity.
So, well, actually, hang on a second. So Iron Hills Ballista, can you get the Dwarven hero? Boy, I haven't done one of these lists in a long time. Can you get the
So I
Dwarven
assume,
history?
so I was moving off of the assumption that Rainier was doing a yellow alliance between Iron Hills and Erebor Reclaimed, where he had Dane and a ballista in one army and then Dory and Nori in the other. And I'm fairly sure double checking. Oh, wait, hold on. This might be illegal.
I see. Okay, so they're not part of the same army.
Dory and Nori are both heroes of fortitude, so that would not work anyways.
Yeah. Okay.
I would have sworn they were heroes of valor, but they are not.
So
I-
one
not even-
other way to do this would be, would be Dane, a bunch of it would be kind of a variant of, kind of what we were talking about with a smattering of high fight values. You have Dane, you have a bunch of Iron Hills guys with spears, you have an Iron Hills ballista, and then you've got a bunch of cheap Lake Town bodies to kind of stand either in front of them or behind them with
And you
spears.
could do that with the Master of Lake Town, maybe.
I mean, you could. I don't think you use Master of Lake Town because I don't think they're green with Iron Hills, but the survivors are. And that might, kind of be a way to increase your body count, kind of at the expense of hitters, unless you want to throw Bard in there. But Bard and Dane get pretty expensive together. But all right, well, I mean, so this is, I guess, a good illustration of kind of the perils of the good lists, right? Where you want to kind of check all these boxes, but when you check all the boxes, you realize you end up having this alliance that doesn't work, or you don't have, the right hero of valor, and it doesn't work. And all of those problems. So
It is
right.
quite a challenge because, again, like typically, I feel like to counter evil, you just counter it with something else that's evil. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's been the American answer so far is I'll see your evil army and I'll raise you an evil army.
Because the American meta is kind of like, if you have to bring good, it's kind of like we're used to in America playing a fight where there are no rules, right? Someone's going to bring a gun, we'll bring a machete, we'll just keep going big, 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 big. So good kind of boxes us in to an extent. I don't know. With other evil players that I've talked to, it just feels restricting,
Yeah. Okay, Evan, what's your theory here?
All right, so my theory starts with Elendil, High King of Numenor on a horse, which is always a fun theory to start with. And in his warband, he's got 6 guys with bows and spears, 7 guys with shields, and then 4 guys with spears. And then in my second warband, I have a captain of Numenor with lance and horse, just chilling on his own, having a good time. And then in my third warband, I have Galadriel from Lothlorien, and she has 2 Galadrim knights with elf bows and shields, 1 wood elf warrior with elf bow, spear, and banner, a wood elf sentinel, 2 wood elf warriors with elf bows and elf spears, 9 Galadrim warriors with shields, and then 3 guards of the Galadrim court. So in total, the army has 38 models, 12 bows, and 8 might points.
How many points did you say this was?
This is 800 points.
800 points.
Mm.
Right. And then it hits 100 goblins.
And then Elendil kills all of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big ask even for Elendil.
He'll be fine.
Yeah, he'll be doing just fine unless he hits the Goblin King in a ring. Or I'm sorry, yeah,
Well,
the Goblin King in a
to
ring.
be fair, Rainier's army would be even worse, I'd argue, against
That's
100
That's a
goblins.
fair point. Although I do say
Or
this,
equally bad.
the Iron Hills Ballista is actually a surprisingly useful weapon against goblins. Having taken an Iron Hills Ballista against a bunch of goblins, because it either picks them up and kills them by the handful, or it forces the goblins to really spread out. And when the goblins really spread out, they're a lot less scary.
Unless they bring the mercenaries, then you're screwed.
That's true. I mean, you got to keep the ballista like far away from terrain. And then you need to keep back kind of enough guys to protect it from random folks running on from the scribe. Unless you can find somebody to get line of sight on the scribe and delete it early with the ballista. But anyway, I digress.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, look, this is a fair way to build a list. You know, the only problem that I mean, this is a list that checks I've got the big hitter who's protected from magic box, and I've got blinding light box, at the expense of the like large numbers of guys box, which is kind of the conundrum for good, right? That, you know, you can check like 2 out of these 3 essential requirements, but not the third, which is always the problem. Because I mean, I agree with you. You can, if you want to get the numbers you need to at least like stay in the game against the goblin towns of the world, you need to get rid of either Elendil or Galadriel, Lady of the Light, and then you created a different problem. So.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Well, it's not Lady of Light, it's the other
Oh
Galadriel.
yeah,
but
Galadriel,
that
or
exacerbates the point, I think. Yeah, so there, obviously the main downside of this list to what I would consider a standard Last Alliance list is it doesn't have Círdan, which has drawbacks and benefits. Obviously, the biggest drawback being Aura of Dismay, which is quite useful against those Goblin Town type lists. Obviously less so against Assault upon Lothlorien, because they just have a bunch of shamans that make them auto pass courage anyways. But Galadriel does offer, against anything but Goblin Town, I'd say much more favorable activity, because the one downside of Aura of Dismay against hordes is that it takes forever, because your opponent is going to be rolling 50 bajillion courage tests, which means often you won't
what,
be able to make
you don't
enough
find that fun
progress
and
against the horde.
engaging?
Yes, I have a great time when I'm just sitting on my phone, waiting for my opponent to pass 20
Yeah,
courage
waiting for your
tests.
opponent to roll an 8 or higher. Yeah.
But it definitely speeds the game up. But if Galadriel gets hit by a ballista bolt, she's not dead, which, as some people may know, is what lost me game 3 on top table at the last Nova, because round 1, Círdan was hit by a ballista bolt, failed his fate roll, and then I got absolutely torn to shreds by Assault upon Helm's Deep, which that is not the case with Galadriel. She just fates it off and then waddles around afterwards and is completely fine.
Yep.
And Elendil also provides that sort of unstoppable force that unless you get very lucky with a black dart on his horse, he's basically not going to lose his horse. Sort of kill 4 models a turn, run into some of your weaker heroes, kill them, and then Galadriel gets a transfix or a compel off on a strong hero, and then that hero is dead, and then look at Elendil, he's just murdered half your army. So it's definitely a tough list because a lot of the proactivity of it relies on Elendil. So it's basically a game of whether or not your opponent can mitigate Elendil. But I think, I mean, definitely in some scenarios it will struggle against Goblin Town, but 38 models isn't small. It's
No,
not a large army.
It's either average size or maybe just a hair below average at 800 points.
Yeah, and to be fair, just again, a personal play style thing with me. I don't like to take more models than this generally, just because I feel like they almost get in the way of my heroes. And I like to take big, strong heroes. So I think this is probably what I would do with good in order to try and stay afloat in this sort of meta. But even then, I would much rather take something like my Mordor army or my Angmar army, and I would like my chances of winning the tournament, I'd say, almost better.
I think my biggest objection to this list is theme, because as we all know, Elendil and Galadriel never fought together.
That's true.
Which
They
is
never did.
probably a good transition to our Rings of Power recap.
I can say that this army is completely themey.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So this is the time when we usually issue the spoiler alert. We're now going to talk about Rings of Power episode 5 and just throw our thoughts out about that. Where, contrary to all theme, okay. So spoiler alert, if you haven't listened, or if you haven't watched episode 5, turn us off now. If you have watched episode 5 or you just don't care, episode 5 is the one where Galadriel and Elendil sail off to war together. So I guess I'll leave the discussion saying that the theory that I espoused last time, that Halbrand is really Saruman, has taken a torpedo.
That was impressive, Dad, because you just got both Halbrand's name and Sauron's name wrong.
Halbrand was really Sauron.
There we go.
Sorry, folks, it's been a long day.
I'm up, y'all.
Yeah, so that was the theory I was espousing last time, and that's taken a significant torpedo hit in episode 5, and that boat is listing heavily to port. It hasn't sunk yet, but I think it may well be heading in that direction, because as we know, Halbrand, contrary to what it looked like at the end of episode 4, is actually sailing back to Middle Earth with Elendil and Galadriel and I guess the Queen Regent, and is not staying behind in Numenor as I thought he was going to whisper sweet nothings and please invade Valinor or into Chancellor Pharazon's ear. So something else is afoot there. So
I think Halbrand is the Witch King. He's a king of men. He's a king of men, and the Witch King has a deep hatred for Numenor and all their descendants. And I think as is, he got a little sass from the Numenorians, and I think they're going to screw him over again, and he's going to eventually turn maybe season 3 or 4 or 5 into the Witch King. That's my theory.
Interesting. Yeah, that's one I hadn't heard. I mean, the other one that we've heard floated is he's the King of the Dead.
I could see that too. That's interesting. I could see that.
But yeah, the witch, who Halbrand is definitely the real. Evan, who do you think Halbrand is?
I think he's a friend.
He's a friend.
Mhm.
Yep. He's just random guy that's just gonna die heroically during
Hey,
the.
he's a friend. Okay, he's a friend.
Okay.
Now, I think the Numenorians thought Sauron was a friend, so I'm not sure how well that logic holds up, but
Yep.
he's a friend.
I think he's a friend right now, but he's not going to be a friend in the end. And I think also because they're playing along with Aragorn's theme from the Lord of the Rings, but I think they're going to break it. And I think Galadriel's so not Galadriel in a way, she's not wise. She's really like driven. I think her pushing Halbrand or whatever his name is, and then him turning evil is going to like switch her off in a way to not have so much faith stuff, and that's when it's going to like arc to where she is in the Third Age. That's just my
it's funny that you talk about the the Aragorn theme with him, and that theme is so strong that some people on the internet have dubbed him Aquagorn, which I thought was amusing.
but I think on purpose, because they want us to think he's going to be the Aragorn that comes and like relieves the Southlands or whatever. We all know the Southlands is Mordor, and we all know that they eventually will serve Sauron. So I think it's going to go along with that, and it's going to break.
Yeah, I mean, I have trouble seeing a way that Halbrand's arc ends in a good way, just given the fact that we never hear about him again in Tolkien. So and you think if it all had a heroic finish, Tolkien would have mentioned him at some point. I don't know. I think this bodes ill.
I think they have a lot of creativity though with a lot of these characters to kind of, I don't know. We have 9 ring wraiths, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of area there.
Well, there's a how it should have ended for the Hobbit movies where they go and they attack the necromancer, and they're talking about how everything looks bad, and he goes, well, still, Galadriel goes, well, still, I'm not worried because we all show up in the next movie. And then she turns to Radagast and goes, except you. And Halbrand's that guy, right? We all show up in the next set of movies except you. And we got to wonder why.
Yeah, it's interesting. But that my theory, he's a Witch King or a ring wraith. What do you guys think of Meteor Man?
I don't see how it's. Yeah, I was going to say I don't see how it's anybody other than Gandalf.
I think it has to be. Have the rights to use his name, and they're even touching on who is it? Nori.
No, they have the rights to use his name.
Okay, but they're doing it. So like the Harfoots or the Hobbits, right?
Yeah.
And they're in like his love for the Hobbits. Even Gandalf in the Fellowship used that phrase, "Not all who wander are lost." Nori sang that song from episode 5, "Not all who wander are lost," and it's like it's a little too familiar, you know what I mean? To where I assume it's Gandalf. But the real thing, though, who are these like strange-looking Eminem like rapper people who just came from the East?
Yeah, the kind of the lizard-like people who showed up. How do we know they came from the East? By the way, you may have missed a subtlety you may have caught a subtlety that I missed.
They come from the East because the Harfoots were in Rovanian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're closer to Ruin. That's a part of the story which was still in Rovanian. They followed along what becomes the Dead Marshes and stuff. But I think from the East because a lot of their imagery is very like interesting. Like what is it? I paused to look at some of the pictures of them, and like on their staffs, there's like different, I think I saw skulls or different interesting things that just looks, I don't know.
Yeah, I gotta pay some more attention to him in our second watch. We haven't done our second watch yet. And yeah, I mean that may be so. So look, all right, it if the theory that the guy that came down in the meteor is Gandalf, that means if they're staying true to the story that he's not alone. And somewhere running around out there is Radagast, Saruman, and two other blue wizards who are yet to be named. And
But now didn't they come in the third age though?
yeah, so they did. But the producers have said that we're cramming all. Yeah, the producers have basically said don't read too much into this from the timeline because we're taking a whole bunch of stuff and we're cramming it together. So
You
yes.
can in some places, and I wonder if it's like kind of annoying some fans.
Oh, yes, it's annoying some fans to no end, but you know
That's my little thing.
they,
It's annoying.
they will have to adapt, overcome, and move on.
Yeah. I'm just interested in the fact that like in the books, Numenor basically had like an empire on the southern coast of Middle Earth and everything, and now it just seems like they're sending 2 ships.
Three. There were 5, 2 burned, and for some reason,
yeah.
Oh,
also, like,
no, but I think the 3 ships with the Queen Regent, and I think it's what 300 soldiers.
Yeah,
it's a little.
I think it's a little light.
In the least, because I don't know. Numenor was like grand, and where they're going with Al-Farazon, and like, I don't know. I don't want to spoilers from the books, but like where that's going. At that time in Numenor in history, they were like super strong and mighty enough to be like, we can take on like the Valinor, or like in like 100 years we can take on the Valinor. So I'm not seeing. Yeah. I'm like a nerd for like the Harad and Umber and stuff like that. So I just want to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much they're going to do, right? Because yeah, look, it's 5 seasons of 10 episodes each, so it's 50 hours of stuff. And I mean, and that was the reason kind of given by the producers for why we're not honoring the timeline, right? Is the timeline covers 2.5 millennia, and we've only got 50 hours of television to do this in, so we got to cut some corners. And that's why they're shortening stuff. And they're taking out significant chunks, and they're taking, although they are kind of like bringing them in by reference, like Beleriand was something. Like Beleriand doesn't show up on the map apparently, but it is at least mentioned when they're having the discussion with Adar. So there's a whole bunch of oversimplification that's going on with Numenor. I mean, I thought the oversimplification we were going to get was that the force was going to sail with Elendil and Isildur, and Galadriel was going to sail off to Middle Earth. In the meantime, Al-Farazon was going to stay back, get whispered in his ear by whoever Sauron was, send the rest of the fleet off to Valinor, and then Numenor sinks, and then the expeditionary force is like what's left over and becomes the Numenorians on Middle Earth. Doesn't look like that it's going that way. It looks like they're gonna spool that out longer than I thought they were going to, which is good. I have no complaints about that.
I think Sink Numenor comes season like 4 or 3 or something.
Yeah, I think it's got to be earlier than season 4, because I think the end of this arc is the battle with Sauron that we see at the beginning of the movies. Mm-hmm. I think
before that happens, he like ransacks Eregion and takes Celebrimbor, right?
Yeah, I guess that's coming. So curious, Rainier, what your thought was on this, because I know this kind of clanged with some of us in our family. was the whole the elves are dying. We need the mithril to save the elves.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff. To begin, there's like a huge TV show for Lord of the Rings. I'm super excited. I'm super grateful. Any of my critiques of it comes out of like, I love a lot of aspects of it. But that was a little weird. I don't know. I don't know much about that lore. I didn't think the elves got their immortality from mithril. I think it's interesting take on how they're gonna kind of like divide the elves and the dwarves. Yeah, I don't know. But to focus on the positive facts, I'll start there. Positive, I think the orcs are made so well. I'm glad they didn't go CGI. I'm glad they went just as prosthetics. The culture of the orcs was never really like looked at that much. And you see them like worshiping Adar, and you see them kind of going in and like the sun effects, and I like that. The dwarves looks amazing. I think even the elves looks amazing. But yeah, I don't know. The mithril thing in episode 5 was kind of
So I did hear an interesting take on this. This was from Ben Richardson, who was at our game day today here, and that there is apparently a theory going around, or at least that Ben espoused, that this whole mithril thing is a head fake by Celebrimbor and perhaps Gilgalad. That basically they're making this up for whatever reason, and that this is an aspect of Celebrimbor's corruption by Sauron, and that something else is going on beneath the surface of this that's going to lead to the divide between the dwarves and the elves. But we'll have to see.
That could be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think if that's true, then that is, I mean, that's less of a diversion from the lore than it sounds. It's just, it would be a detail of the lore that we're not really familiar with, but it's an aspect of an arc that we are familiar with.
No, yeah. And they're kind of setting it up to where Celebrimbor and Gilgalad are kind of sneaky. You know what I mean?
Are
like really sneaky. And it's like, ooh, like Gilgalad, like that's not the song like that they sang in the book, but interesting take on it, So yeah, really good. I didn't think about that, to be honest. I wasn't focused too much on mithril from that episode. I was more interested in Adar.
Oh yeah, which is another interesting question. A theory I have seen advanced, this one on the internet. Basically, all I am is a rumor monger here, but that's fine. But I can't remember what this guy's name was, but he was the elf that betrayed Gondolin in the First Age. Sorry, you blipped there, Rainier. Can you say that again?
The Dark Elf.
Yeah. And that he was, that's who this is. I think he was supposed to have died, but maybe he lived, and maybe that's why he's horribly scarred. And that's who this is. I think that'd be a fun little deep dive. That's him.
Do you think he is Sauron though?
No, too obvious.
And why isn't too obvious?
Too obvious. It'd be like saying the butler did it.
I see. His character is very interesting though. And I think like what he talked to, I forget that one. I forget there's a lot of names for the new characters, but the one elf in the Southlands.
Oh, Arondir or
Arondir.
Arondir, I think is how it's pronounced.
He talked about, what was it, Balerion with him.
Yeah.
And he had ours armor. He's got the rivers of, and it's just like, I don't know. His character is very interesting, but so Sauron blocked out the sun, and he's looking to block out the sun, but maybe he's serving Sauron or something. I don't know.
We'll have to see.
It's interesting. He never denied that he was Sauron though. He just like smashed that one dude. He was like, "Watcha, how dare you?"
Yeah, it seems so obvious. And you know what it doesn't have going for it with the Gandalf thing is, even though I think all signs are pointing toward mysterious stranger dropping from meteor being Gandalf, is that, as you point out, in the timeline he's not supposed to be there, so at least he's a surprise. Whereas Sauron's there somewhere, we just don't know where. And big bad elf like guy who's leading all the orcs just seems like such the obvious answer that I don't know. I guess I'd be disappointed if it's him.
And also he seems too elf to me. Like he was talking about, was it Balerion and stuff like that in the
Yeah.
river? And it's like, he's definitely an elf. And Sauron was not an elf.
Yep. I think that's right. That's a fair point.
That's
All right.
Interesting.
All right, guys. So it's getting late. I hope you've all enjoyed this, including my repeated misstatements of our transposition of Sauron and Saruman and fight value and defense value. But like I said, it's been a long day gaming, but it was fun. Well, I guess we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
You guys.